Theatre Academy also on my behalf. I'm intending to give you an example of embodied research in performing arts as artistic research. And this research exposition divides into three parts. First, I will outline my research problem and consider what kind of idea of artistic research it is based on. Then I will specify and focus on the analysis of one single aspect of the problematics. Finally, I will provide you with a short practical demonstration of the topic with the kind assistance of four MA students from Dance and Choreography Theatre Academy. Like I wrote in my abstract, if we move from the traditional understanding of dramaturgy as a textual practice towards an idea of dramaturgy as a performative or scenic practice, we face a simple problem which is both theoretical and practical and quite difficult to solve. How do we deal with the fact that the body becomes a dramaturgical component? It may sound mechanistic or even cynical to consider or treat human performing bodies as components. That is nevertheless what is required when in post-dramatic and post-human performance the performer is required to confront the equality of all dramaturgical elements or material. By asking what is a component, I make an implicit ontological claim regarding the subject of my research and its very nature as artistic research. I namely state that artistic research may have a definable subject of research and a level of reality which exists independently of other possible layers, but connected to them. That subject area consists of what I call artistic phenomena. Those phenomena are something the artistic processes, practices and works brings forth and whose existence and observation are dependent on those constitutive technical or phenomena-technical operations. That is also why I, as an artist researcher, have to be a practitioner. I have to be able to produce and share the phenomena I'm studying. Artistic phenomena as subject of research do not consist of artworks or other established modes of art making, but something in them. They are not at least at first instance, aesthetic phenomena, which always are more or less received, not produced, and studied at first hand in aesthetics. Why should I, as an artist capable of producing these phenomena in practice, get interested in them in research theoretically? I may have many reasons. One of them may be the desire to indicate how the artistic phenomena are not only a part of our common reality, but constitutive of it. The aim is not only to indicate how they are irreducible to other layers of reality and respective modes of knowledge, but how reality is artistic as such. If artist researcher is capable of arguing on that level, then her activity, interestingly, joins the program of the artistic avant-garde. The avant-gardist claims for leading art and stopping with the institutional modes of art making have always been complemented by utopias and dreams of the merge between art and everyday practice with real life. But what finally makes the reality artistic, if any example of the existing and therefore established modes of art making cannot satisfy, cannot correspond to it? When I speak about artistic phenomenon, when I'm speaking about artistic phenomena, I'm referring to that specific something. As we start to approach artistic phenomena, we should keep in mind that we are dealing with hypothetical and ontologically paradoxical objects which are strange to us in two senses. They are unknown and they are wondrous. The challenge of an artist researcher, the challenge I would like to share with you now, is to try to encounter those entities in all their strangeness without trying to undo it by external rational explanations, and then follow the innate rationality of these objects, the logic of their reality. In this presentation, I will focus now on one single aspect of artistic components, which in itself is already very complicated and opens further questions related to many other disciplinary and cultural fields. Namely, I will argue that insofar artistic components can be considered as bodies, those bodies are essentially weightless. Weight is usually conceived in twofold ways: as an empirically measurable quality of the material objects based on mass and gravitation, and as a psychophysical experience of weight caused by the mechanical stress. Weightlessness means literally lack of weight, but as I will argue, it does not need to imply lack of experience. According to Einstein, an entity in a state of free and continuous fall cannot recognize it directly unless it confronts an obstacle. Since gravitation is not strictly speaking a force whose pull I could feel as such, but an intrinsic aspect of space-time. You barely see anything there, but you can imagine, and that's what we are doing when we are doing artistic research. We are practicing imagining in a special way, so you have a special chance for that. We have no reason to doubt Einstein. Physically speaking, there are no absolutely weightless bodies in the universe. Weightlessness can only be detected locally when the body is not under any exterior mechanical pressure, but there is no point in space outside gravitational fields. Okay. Weightlessness of the physical bodies can only be relative. When described in terms of gravitation, bodies have nevertheless an interesting double nature as both extensive multiple objects with factual material composition and shape, and as singular points consisting of the center of gravity. Whereas at the level of experience, there seems to be two types of weightlessness at least, relative and absolute. The experience of weightlessness is relative when the body is so far from the superior centers of gravity that it does not feel their influence, or when that influence has been locally or temporarily suspended or neutralized by opposing it by another equal force. I would have liked to show you a few examples of relative weightlessness, which all are produced by technical device, namely, first of all, the portrait of Becky Whitson, the commander of the International Space Station, then image of the interiority of the airplane during the zero-gravity flight, then third image of a special kind of sports which is called dynamic flying, which takes in a special type of wind tunnel. Here you have some simple examples that you can Google by yourself. But there is also an experience of absolute weightlessness of being free of all gravitation or being beyond gravitation. Physically, all merely virtual or immaterial phenomena are, of course, absolutely weightless, to start with shadows and reflections. Also, all so-called mental phenomena like perceptions, feelings and thoughts can be considered as something immaterial, incorporeal, and therefore as weightless entities. But we never experience their weightlessness, and for the same reason we do not consider them as bodies either. However, when suddenly, in an ecstatic corporeal state, we feel ourselves weightless, our experience is not relative, but absolute. This experience of absolute weightlessness does not equal with losing one's body. On the contrary, it is intrinsically and paradoxically a corporeal experience. In classical terms, that experience might be called aesthetic, but what has aesthetics to tell us about weightless bodies, unless as cultural metaphors, signifiers, fictions, and so on? Instead, in artistic practices, and especially in the performing arts, as we will soon see, weightless bodies are a constituent part of practitioners' reality. Do we have an idea and experience of the absolute weightlessness because we have art? Or is art just a medium where we can express our sensations of being weightless? I would argue neither nor, and claim instead that artistic components are intrinsically weightless bodies, and our occasional experiences of weightlessness relates directly to our capacity to participate in the reality of those elements. That is at least my hypothesis that I'm now aiming to test. Artistic components as weightless bodies. To some extent, this is fairly obvious. Most often so obvious that we do not even bother to pay attention to it. For instance, imagine a musical composition and its performance. Even though the act of the musician can be a highly demanding physical effort, requiring special techniques, body techniques, the resulting sound objects that we hear are not considered artistically as physical objects. This does not imply that they are automatically mere psychical either. The character of the sound may be highly material, and yet they are regarded as weightless. It seems that in order to speak and think about these things correctly, a special ontology is needed. Can we satisfy ourselves with the existing philosophical theories of art? I think the mere existence of artistic research indicates that we cannot. Are artists better aware about these things than philosophers? I believe they are. The next picture I would have liked to show you is a painting by Finnish painter and performance artist Seppo Salminen, which displays, at least apparently, a pair of bare feet standing on apparently wooden ground, and probably those feet belong to the artist himself. And I'm asking what they are telling about us about gravity and weightlessness. First of all, you can imagine all this, that the relation of the painted feet with the painted ground is not gravitational, but mimetic. As the bare feet touch the ground, they do not put pressure on it. Their touch is like that of a magic stick. The painted bare feet give to the painted ground something of their own quality, that of being a body and that of being weightless. And suddenly everything floats in the air. Maybe this is the general rule in the pictorial space. It may also have something to do with the process of visual abstraction. The connections between the compositional elements or components in painting, like here those between the bare feet and the ground, are particular. What keeps them together? In the Western imagination, the idea of corporeal weightlessness is traditionally connected to different kind of abstract and virtual beings like demons, mythical beings like demons, angels, spirits, as well as to the idea of the human soul. Like in Avicenna's hypothesis on the floating man, by the way. But it's also connected to the Christian ideas of resurrection, transfiguration and ascension, which are characteristically corporeal events. And the next image, hope you have seen it somewhere, is by Hans Suss von Kulbach from 1513, The Ascension of the Christ, where we only see the feet disappearing in the heaven. These kind of images, which people have encountered in churches in particular, have communicated to them throughout history, to them or to their bodies, an intensive idea of corporeal weightlessness, which is significant and understandable to anyone, no matter if he or she is a believer or believes in resurrection or not. Theoretically, as one might argue, we are witnessing here the process of visual abstraction, which culminates in the modernistic painting and the abstract compositionality it entails. Like in the paintings of Kandinsky or Malevich, whose painting I would have liked to show you here, Supremus 55 from 1916, where all the elements look like if they were floating weightlessly in the air and some nevertheless connected to each other. For both classical and neo-avant-garde, the idea of overcoming gravity has been a central motive. Jyrki Siukonen, a pioneer of Finnish artistic research in visual arts, dedicated his doctoral study in 2001 to the study of this particular phenomenon. His work, titled Uplifted Spirits, Earth-Bound Machines, focused on the dream of flight, which at the beginning of the 20th century was associated to the architectural and social fantasies of new urban life, and manifested itself in particular in different kind of failed or fantastic attempts to build a flying machine. Most famous of them being undoubtedly Le Tatlin by Vladimir Tatlin from the 1930s, and here's an image of Le Tatlin for those who can see it. But most of you have probably seen those images, and happily so. Many may think that this stream has now come to its end and been substituted by the development of space technology or media technology. But does it only imply that gravity has taken us over, like the painting by Ilya Orlov, a doctoral candidate at the Fine Arts Academy, ironically suggests in his image from a series called The Very Last Futurist Exhibition, where all those suprematists' elements have fallen down to the ground and to the bottom of the frame of the painting. I wouldn't be that sure. Like Siukonen, who at a certain point of his study makes a distinction between the feeling for flying and the feeling of flying, I suggested earlier a distinction between absolute and relative weightlessness, since for some peculiar reason, the relative weightlessness provided by technological means, the feeling of lightness, does not satiate our desire for absolute weightlessness. Another very famous example of visual avant-garde, Anthropometry 96 by Yves Klein from 1961, titled People Begin to Fly, indicates that we are not dealing here with a mere mind game. The feeling for flying is related to the lost experience of corporeal weightlessness we should regain one day and by some means. Perhaps instead of flying, we should rather speak about levitation. And that is also what Yves Klein himself has suggested by noticing that, I quote Yves Klein, "Today everyone who paints the space must actually go into space to paint, but he must go there without any faking and by his own means. In a word, he must be capable of levitating." End of quote. The word levitation evokes images of mystical spiritual practices and experiences from both Western and Eastern traditions. YouTube is full of related material which plays with our simultaneous desire to believe and to doubt, and which, instead of supporting what I'm saying here, is more susceptible to work as a counter-evidence. Therefore, no levitation videos this time, but there are plenty of them available if you just click. What I'm intending to show you now, it may be less spectacular, but it's certainly something more real. Weightless bodies have always played an important role in staged performances. The illusion of flying that can be created with mechanical devices, to begin with the cranes and harnesses by means of which gods enter the Greek state at the moment of Deus ex machina. But the illusion of overcoming the gravity can be reached by different kinds of body techniques as well. When a dancer leaps in the air and at the apex of her jump suddenly freezes her posture, the body constitutes an immobile figure which during a short moment more looks like floating in the air. As an actor in a Japanese no play or Gyogen play walks rapidly sweeping her soles against the floor, it looks like she were floating across the stage. Or as a street dancer makes her sneakers float by using the moonwalk technique, which derives from the classical mime. In all these examples, the mimetic act, namely the distinction of the body from its background and its surroundings, combines with a hidden muscular effort, body technique, which eliminates the visual effect of gravity on a performer's body. As the result of this combination, the performing body goes through a certain kind of virtualization, as I would call it, which is now of interest to us. What is at stake here is more than just an illusion. As I argue, having or being a weightless body is a genuine corporeal experience embedded in our corporeal constitution. For the same reason, it is at our reach at every moment. In order to understand how this is possible, we have to discuss the gravity and its relation to the human physiology a bit more in detail. Every physical body has a center of gravity. Here comes another quote. Mechanics teaches us that a body's center of gravity is the point of balance of all the parts of that body, and that the line of gravity is a line perpendicular to the ground from this point. And here's an image for those who can distinguish it. But anyway, center of gravity and a line of gravity. so familiar with our center of gravity that most of the time we do not notice its existence at all. But we surely become conscious of it at the moment of falling, or especially when we are about to fall. According to physics, an object located on a surface falls when the gravity line moves outside the object's base of support, and the correction cannot bring the object back onto the safe area. A chair cannot correct its position and it falls without exception. Instead, a living organism like a human body can control its relation to the gravity and make the necessary moves in order to retain the balance. But in order to do that, my organism has to be in somewhere aware of its center of gravity. We know that the vestibular organ, which informs brain of changes in the body position, is situated somewhere in the inner parts of our ears. Something in me, in the lower parts of my brain, is all the time in contact with my center of gravity, which when I'm standing is located at the lower part of my torso, underneath the navel, somewhere over here. The unconscious processes of my central nervous system create conditions for my possibility as a conscious subject to become aware of my center of gravity, to control it, and ultimately to play with it. Performing artists play with the center of gravity in many ways. To begin with genres where the play with the gravity is central for both dramaturgically and technically, like in slapstick comedy, contact improvisation, or mime, like in this image that you don't see by Etienne, or representing Etienne Decroux, one of the key figures of modern mime, demonstrating disequilibrium. What is wondrous, however, in this center of gravity, that physically it doesn't exist. Even though it is basically a geometrical and virtual entity, we can imagine it and feel it. Like kabuki dancer Katsuko Asuma has once put it, I quote him, "My master used to say that every performer has to find his own power center. It could be imagined as a ball of steel in the center of a triangle whose apex is the anus and whose other two angles are the corners of the pelvis at the level of the navel." Does the center of gravity exist or not? If we try to think about it, at least three things seem obvious. It is a virtual one-dimensional point, it is weightless, and we can become aware of it. How does this happen? Grounding is a well-known technique for getting in contact with our center of gravity and negotiating with it. From one tradition to another, grounding is generally considered as an essential aspect of skillful corporal performance. It both feels and shows out. But what does it consist of? It is much easier to show how it is produced than explain what is it about. The energetic stamping of the feet against the ground is one simple way and widely used, and it is a central element, for instance, in Suzuki training, of which the next image is supposed to illustrate. To my mind, and unlike Tadashi Suzuki himself has suggested, grounding is not dependent on the existence or use of the feet, unless other body parts can work as a feet as well. Grounding creates for a trainee an experience of being rooted in the ground, but that is not its only aim. As a pre-expressive or pre-performative technique, it is meant to support for the performing is meant to provide support for the performing gestures and actions, as well as for the use of voice. A grounded body is not only leaning on an external support like a normal body does, but it also constitutes a higher ground, a corporeal platform or stage for its expressive operations. Grounding creates within a body a clearly articulated dynamic division, a tension, which draws the body simultaneously into two opposite directions, upwards and downwards. Within the limits of tension now, a performer can better detach and liberate some of her body parts and areas for scenic expression. Good grounding and the tension it creates enables the performing body to maintain, as Eugenio Barba called it, a permanently unstable balance. To control one's balance, to lose it, to regain it, to play with it. And at its most fundamental level, a corporal performer consists of this kind of balance in action or elementary drama, both of these formulations coming from Barba. The expressive corporeal elements which enter the stage of the body, like movement, gestures, positions and sounds, take place in a particular technically sustained state of balance. They are born through and sustained by a kind of perpetual balancing. Physically, an object is in balance when it is under the influence of equal but opposite forces. In a living organism, the center of gravity, as the center of balance, is not merely a geometrical point, but the end point and starting point of different kinds of nervous and muscular processes. And that is probably the physiological explanation for why the center of gravity can be expressed, even though it does not physically exist. Our bodies carry a weightless point within themselves, be it more or less concealed. This point is simultaneously embodied and totally detached from the body, and we can become aware of its virtually actual existence. This may also explain why we can so easily imagine that our extensive body is replaced by a singular one-dimensional point in space. As I see it, this kind of ecstatic experience of singularity is constitutive for our corporality, as constitutive as the perception of the contours of our extensive body. It may be that at the corporeal level, these two, singularity and extension, cannot even be detached from each other. This is how the body imagines itself. This is how body is born as imagined. Physically, every balancing operation of our body implies a structurally weightless moment. How can these different kinds of moments be distinguished from each other and the center of gravity at the bottom of our torso? I think they cannot be distinguished. No matter where the balancing takes place, no matter the area, body area, it automatically communicates with our center of gravity by intermediary of our nervous system. This communication endows on each body part its relative autonomous, in other words, local and momentary corporeal existence. This may be the reason why our body can conceive itself as a composite of multiple bodies. It continuously divides into parts without ever constituting a whole. At the level of everyday corporeal existence, this generation of components takes place repeatedly and all the time, provided that we go on expressing ourselves through sounds, movements, positions and gestures. Whereas in performing arts, the components are produced and used deliberately in order to create corporeal compositions or embodied constellations, like they are called in the title of this exposition. Okay, it's time to move to practice. The first thing I suggest we do is that we create a completely weightless point, that we find a completely weightless point at the tip of our finger, for instance, index finger. Basically, this can be done simply by concentrating your attention to the fingertip, but you can also sensitize your finger or attune it in various ways. You can simply, for instance, rub it against your palm, touch it by the tip of your tongue, or try to touch by your finger your center of gravity, imaginary center of gravity, by pushing towards your center, pressing the stomach and trying to reach in your imagination. That's probably the strongest way to attune your finger. But when the finger is attuned, then you just let it go. Namely, you let that spot, that something at the tip of your finger, go on its way, and you just follow it. And the rest of your body supports its wandering. And it's totally weightless. And you can return it back to your body by rubbing it against your body, simply like this. You can try this at home. Or during the break. Very easy. Of course, we may now find different kind of physiological explanation for what happened here. For instance, we may claim that the exercise is based on the technical activation of the so-called tactical corpuscles, the nerve endings which sensitize our finger pads. Maybe that has something to do with the electricity as well. The explanation may sound probable, but it still doesn't explain how this kind of reversed activation, the voluntary creation of virtual affects, is possible. In other words, how acting or dancing is possible, since that is what we are doing when we are performing. As I now demonstrated, those pre-expressive auto-affective processes which are always at work when a body performs. So basically, the same thing happens in a wider scale when I'm performing on my body surface. These processes can of course be studied from very many different points of view, and here my only point was to indicate that the experience of absolute weightlessness is really literally at the reach of our hand. But now we try something more challenging. The idea for the following experiment derives from the religious iconography related to bodily resurrection and such kind of things. Like, for instance, in this picture, which is Raphael's Transfiguration, you all know it, so it doesn't matter if you don't see it, you can imagine. Nevertheless, my embodied rereading of these images is based on one significant corporeal detail in it. Namely, when a body floats in the air weightlessly, the feet are liberated from their supportive function, and the ankles can relax, like in swimming or resting. Okay. I now ask our dancers Sebastian, Jenna, Elina and Lotta to enter the stage. So they will now make leaps in the air by very different kind of techniques, and I ask the technical assistants to unsettle this. So we make three variations. The first task is to spring by using improvised techniques that give to the dancer a feeling that at the apex, at the high point of her leap, the body will stay hanging in the air. This moment of imaginary levitation is very short and momentary, but yet recognizable, at least to the performer herself. At the moment of the levitation, the focus of the imagination, embodied imagination, is in the way the body detaches from the outside world. So, please. This should be maybe a thing to be taken into account, that this live rehearsing and this hasn't been rehearsed properly ever really before. They just basically know what I'm going to ask them to do. So yeah. So please, everyone gives an example of a technique.
now like that I just had like some place where I had from, but I didn't like try to go on top of anything. Okay. So I tried like that I have from somewhere that I don't like have other things for the rest of the life.
Yes. Okay. Outfit. Jos sun mielestä oli tekniikka, niin...
I have another.
You have another technique?
Yes.
Okay.
But I didn't try it yet.
So, feel free. Yeah. Okay. Actually, that was the thing I was aiming to suggest you next. That we okay. Let's try it now. A bit more classical thing, that namely the one that I already mentioned. At the apex of the movement, we try to freeze the body in a position that they make a kind of immobile image. Okay, let's see how it goes. And now now in the imagination's perspective is from as they see as themselves as if from outside. Okay, let's try this. Thanks. I think that is fairly obvious. But now let's try this hardest thing. The technique I suggested, namely that at the apex of the leap, you really release your ankles and try to get attuned by that reaction, so that it's the effect takes over all of your body. And now let's pay attention to the feet especially. See how the quality of the leap changes. Okay, we thank Sebastian, Jenna, and Elina, and Lotte. My presentation is now in the end. To conclude, I just want to remind you of the initial purpose of this presentation, namely to give you an example of artistic research as research of artistic phenomena that come forth in the arts, but exist also independently of artistic contexts. What I have studied here are the artistic entities I have called components, how they can be reached and detected mainly by artistic means, and how they nevertheless are constitutive for all experience of embodiment, both in everyday and empirical sense, in science, in art, and in religion. Thank you.